Good evening, students. It's Tuesday night. I want to make some more progress on chapter 21. I'm on page 559 in the chapter Buyer's Duties After Rejection. Notice it says the buyer must follow, if the buyer is a merchant, must follow the reasonable instructions that the seller gives concerning the disposition of the goods. If the goods are perishable or may deteriorate rapidly, then the buyer must make a reasonable effort to sell the goods. Buyer must reimburse the buyer for any expenses and a commission. Also, the buyer may ask reasonably and in good faith in selling those goods. If the rejected goods are perishable, I'm on page 560, the buyer can store the goods for the seller, buyer can reship the goods, or buyer can resell them for the seller's benefit, and he gets these expenses and a reasonable commission. Assurances, we're going to talk about a case on Monday, seeing tonight's our last meeting time this week. Assurances is when there is doubt as to the other party being able to perform. I can ask for assurances that in fact they can perform. Anticipatory repudiation on page 563 we've previously talked about. So let's look at these cases now. In case one, we have a person that has a contract to sell popcorn for $4.75 a pound. Price of the popcorn goes up to, or $4.75 for 100 pounds. Price goes up to $8 per 100 pounds. And so they say, hey, because you didn't pay me as previously required in the contract, you're in breach of contract, and therefore I'm going to take my popcorn and sell it elsewhere. But at no time did our seller insist on payment. He didn't ask for payment. And therefore, we have a waiver of the requirement. Remember, we talked about waiver that in terms of rent. Well, waiver applies here because this provision was never enforced. And because it was never enforced, there was a waiver of that provision. Okay, case number 2 is a right of inspection case. Remember, we talked about that a buyer has the right to inspect goods before he accepts the goods. The only exception to that is in the case of a COD, in which I still have the right to inspect, but I have to pay for the goods before I can get possession of the goods to actually inspect them. So here, in this case, we have to decide if this is a COD. Because, let's see, Layford gave Cowan a cashier's check for $1,500, took possession of the coupe with the understanding to pay the remaining. Cowan arranged for Charles to deliver the remaining vehicles. Canterbury dropped the convertible off at the lot owned by and proceeded to deliver the other one. He refused to unload it until Ledford paid him $1,500. Ledford refused to make the payment until he had the opportunity to inspect the convertible, which he suspected was not in the same condition as before. Canterbury refused this request and loaded up both cars and returned them, and then our seller now wants the full purchase price. Well, here, this does not appear to be a COD. There was not an arrangement. You have to pay me $1,500 on delivery. And And there, because it's not a COD, he has the right to inspect the goods before he accepts them. All right. We have, in case 3, we have 3 carloads of, or 2 carloads of potatoes put on board a railroad car, but they were not properly packed. There was not pallets put under them so that they froze and were ruined. Part of the obligation of the seller, even if it's FOB shipping point, part of the obligation of the seller is to properly pack the goods before they're shipped. And here, our seller did not actually do that. He did not properly pack the goods. All right, case 4, we have a defective violin that was accepted. Once this student took and showed it to her teacher, teacher said, hey, this is defective in a myriad of ways. And so what they want to do is they want to revoke their prior acceptance. And this is on page 554 of your textbook. If you will turn there. A buyer may revoke acceptance of nonconforming goods when, number 1, the nonconformity substantially impairs the value of the goods. And that appears to be the case. This crack in this violin made it so that the violin didn't have the proper tone. Buyer accepted them without knowledge of the nonconformity. That also appears to be true because of her inexperience, or because the buyer accepted the goods because the buyer's assurances that they would cure the defect. That part doesn't apply, but she accepted them without knowledge of the defect, and because she accepted them without knowledge of the defect, she can revoke her prior acceptance. Okay. Here in case 5, we have a bunch of fireworks that's sent to a buyer. Fireworks apparently got wet, and because these fireworks got wet, some of them were damaged. But our buyer took these fireworks. They had the opportunity to inspect. They did not, and they took the fireworks and sent them out and treated them as if they owned them. And then later came along and said, we want to now return a bunch of these fireworks. Once you treat goods as if you own them, you've accepted them whether you've actually made a verbal or an express acceptance or not. And here, that's exactly what happened in case 5, is they treated these goods as if they owned them, and therefore there was an acceptance then of those goods. All right, with that, we'll finish these cases next Monday. Have a good weekend. Have a good Easter Sunday, and be safe and stay hunkered down so you can stay well and your family members can stay well. Good night.